Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Promo Minds podcast interview series. I'm your host, Steve Leslie, and today we have an amazing guest. She is just crushing it in real estate. She's a real estate agent for Coxworth and Associates, which is a subgroup of the Sotheby's International Realty Canada. She has been born and raised on the southern shores of Georgian Bay. And when she's not working, she enjoys going to Costa Rica to visit some of her family members. So please, without further ado, please welcome Megan Coxworth. Hey, Megan, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Megan and I have connected over a networking group in the Midland area. And so I wanted to bring her on today because the last meetup, she had shared some vital information, some of the legislation in the real estate world that has changed. And she said, it's hard to keep up with legislation in general as a consumer. So I've brought her on here today to share some of that and share a bit of her background and expertise. So maybe to start, if you could share a little bit about how you got started in real estate.
Yeah, for sure. So I come from a background of real estate agents. So my father is a realtor and I work with him now, which has been amazing. My mom also did real estate for a number of years. So growing up, it was always in the back of my mind as something that I could do, something that I would really enjoy doing. I heard about the ins and outs through both of them. And I went away to school in Ottawa, so I left home. I was in Ottawa for about 11 years, and I did something completely different. I was in mental health and addictions and working at a youth treatment center for mental health and addiction. So throughout that time, I loved it. It was amazing. It was great. I was there for about 5 years, and 2 of those years, or about, I guess, a year and a half, was during COVID. So, as I'm sure happened to a lot of people, COVID kind of changed my outlook on things. It kind of changed my perspective on things. I've always been a huge family person. So, living in Ottawa was always a little bit challenging because it was quite far away. And throughout the pandemic, not being able to go visit my family was really, really big for me. It also was very challenging to work in an environment where our clients lived with us, not with us, but lived in the treatment center. So they were there 24/7. They had no outside influence. All they had was us. And it just got really challenging working with them. And they didn't really fully understand the scope of what was happening in the real world of COVID. And to be honest with you, I got really burnt out. I got burnt out at work. I got burnt out at home, and I needed a change. And I've always wanted to come back to the area because I love, I love the area. I love Georgian Bay. It's my home. Always wanted to come back here. So I started thinking about ways to come back and to get back here. There were couple of options. I could go back to school for what I was already doing, or I could go back to school and do something completely different. And I started thinking about the kind of lifestyle I wanted and where I wanted to be specifically. And real estate just increasingly became more at the forefront and like something that I would really want to do. So I just said, you know what, this is it. I'm jumping headfirst, diving into it. And I did my course as I was continuing to work at the center. And as soon as I was done, I packed up everything and moved back home. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you mentioned that you worked in the mental health and addictions area because I interviewed a woman a couple months ago, and she came from the mental health world. I forget where she said she was working, but sort of the same thing happened, and she was looking for a change, and she became an insurance agent.
Oh, okay.
And so I taking that, I have this question for you. Have you found that with your background in mental health, have you found that you have added gifts that you can use with your clients moving forward in the real estate process.
Absolutely. A lot of realtors kind of joke that, we wear many different hats. We're not just realtors. We can become, home designers, stagers, therapists, even. Buying a home or selling a home can be really emotional. And so if you're not in tune with other people's emotions or have empathy or sympathy or, all of those things that come with understanding what people are thinking and feeling, it can be really difficult. So I think that that has really helped me to have a connection with my clients on, a deeper level. And a lot of the times too, people don't necessarily really know what they want or how to express themselves or to really say exactly what they're thinking and feeling. So I think that I have an advantage there where I can fairly, sometimes maybe not easily, but I can at the end of the day pick things out. I'm really good at reading people and, knowing if they're uncomfortable or if they're just kind of going along with things because they think they should. I think that really helps me with my clients to just have that connection.
That's amazing. That is a gift that is hard to come by, and you can't read a book and be well versed in it. It's something that you have to experience. I
Yeah,
know
definitely.
my fiance, she's that's one of the things that makes her so great at what she does is that ability to kind of see read between the lines sort of thing. Like there's the objection that people might have or an issue that people might say, but then it's seeing what's actually like uncovering that and doing it in a safe way. Like, you know, I've heard it said something. If the more personal something feels, the more universal it probably is. So that's amazing. I enjoy hearing that.
Definitely.
So, like I said at the start, one of the things that we wanted to talk about here was the updated legislation. I know you're well versed in that, and so I'll just kind of rhyme off a few things, and hopefully we can educate the audience a little bit here.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that you had brought up was the elimination of customer and the introduction of self-represented party. So maybe you could explain what that means exactly and also what that means for you.
Yeah, definitely. So prior to December 1st, 2023, we had clients and then we had customers. And you could choose which you wanted to be, whether it was a client or a customer. And the services that we provide as realtors would differ between the two. And what we're finding and what our kind of governing bodies were finding too is that the general public was a little bit confused by about the difference of the two. So they chose to just completely eliminate customer, get that right out, and then introduce self-represented parties. So that what that means for consumers is that you are either a client or you're not a client, in which case then you become a self-represented party. So with client is that is our highest level of service that we can provide. So there are things that are covered in our legislation that we are legally obligated um, to provide to you. So undivided loyalty, your interests take priority above all else. We have disclosure requirements. So anything that's relevant to the transaction, we are legally required to disclose to you. Confidentiality, so your information is secure, only shared with consent, and that's all required by law. And to ensure your best interests and being cautious and aware about any conflicts of interest that we might have through multiple representation or what have you. So that's kind of client in a nutshell. Before, when we had customer, it was a little bit different. So we'd have like a limited customer service agreement with a client. So we would be able to assist them in house showings. We'd be able to write offers for them. We'd be able to, maybe sell their house, but we only would put it on MLS. We wouldn't have it anywhere else. It was just a mere posting of what they used to call it. So with customer, we still were required to treat them fairly, treat them with integrity and honesty, but we didn't quite have that level of, undivided loyalty, their best interest in mind. If they told us something that maybe contradicted to what another client of ours had, our client would take priority versus the customer. So it was a little bit confusing for people because it wasn't really clear on the differences. So now with the self-represented party, we basically aren't allowed to assist them at all. So if you've declared yourself a self-represented party, a realtor cannot provide you with any services, opinions, or advice. We can't do anything to encourage you to rely on our knowledge, our skill, or judgment. And we can't encourage you to represent yourself or discourage you from working with another real estate agent or brokerage. Now, with all of this, there are a few things to kind of keep in mind if you're deciding to go the self-represented route, is that any services that we might provide you need to be at the end of the day in service to our client. So if I have a listing and a self-represented party wants to see that listing, we can show them that listing, but that's it. We can't say, we can only provide them with facts when we're doing that listen. We can't give advice on what amount they should offer. We can't give them comparables. We basically can't do anything for them except for open the door and show them around. So with that, it's a little bit more risky. The self-represented party handles all aspects of the transaction from, determining, they have to determine property value on their own. They need to do all the inquiries about zoning or permitted uses, things like that, navigating and filling out offers, making sure that they're filling it out properly, making sure that they're adding the correct terms and conditions in order to protect themselves. And then the other thing to keep in mind is if, the agent isn't representing you, you're representing yourself in that transaction, they're representing the other party. So anything that you say or do, you have to be cautious because as, representing the other party, they're my client, I have a legal obligation to have their best interest in mind. So if you say something that, you'd offer X amount, I could go back to my client and be like, well, their offer is 500, but they told me earlier they could go up to 550. Let's make them go up to 550, essentially. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to kind of navigate, especially because this is something new. But it is interesting that they've decided to go this route.
Fascinating. I didn't know that about the different styles there. And even at the beginning, I was kind of confused. Like, there's a customer and there's a client prior to this legislation. So I guess with the self-represented party, when would you typically see someone go that route?
I haven't had anybody go that route so far, and I am in a lot of groups with other realtors that they also haven't seen a lot of people choose to go this route because there are a lot of risks. There are a number of times where they might choose to go this route. Say they are an investor, they do a lot of house flipping, they've bought and sold, you know, 5, 10 houses, and they know they're familiar with the process, they know what they're doing. So in that case, they might choose to have a lawyer drop the contract. So they'll drop the offer and they become a self-represented party. So that could be an instance where it might work out better for them, or easier, whatever they choose to do. And then on the flip side, you probably see it already, the for sale by owners homes. So if it's a for sale by owner, they might choose to continue to, be a self-represented party. And in that instance, an agent it's much the same as what it was before. We would bring them an offer. Um, But on their side, again, if they can choose to have a lawyer to go through the offer, they might not be completely on their own. They're just not represented by an agent.
Okay. So then I guess just based on your description there, is it more set up? Would this be more, would it be more beneficial or I guess more in line with a seller then as compared to a buyer?
It could be for sure. And the reason I say that is because in Ontario, typically the seller is the one paying out the commission for both sides. So as a buyer, if you use a realtor, you don't have to pay out commission unless you have a separate agreement with that agent. But typically, you don't pay commission. So to use an agent as a buyer is essentially free for you. So it's kind of like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you? Right?
Hmm.
They're working in your best interest to find the best home for you that's going to work, and they know the market, they know the offer process, they can negotiate on your behalf, all of that, all of those benefits that you get essentially for free. So on the buyer side, yeah, sometimes for me, I'm like, I don't know why anyone would really choose to be self-represented. On the selling side, definitely. I mean, a lot of times it comes down to money, right? Obviously, want to make the most that you can for your home. So some people choose not to use an agent to sell their home to save on commission. On that side, there is still a lot of risk to that because there are a lot of disclosure obligations as a seller that you need to do. And some of that can come back to bite you pretty hard if they're not done properly. If you have, a latent defect or something and you don't know that you have to disclose that, and then you sell your home, the buyer comes back, it can be a real issue. So, I mean, yeah, you save on commission, but maybe down the road, because you didn't do it properly, it could end up costing you a lot more.
Yeah, I gotcha. It's so what you just described reminds me of a typical price objection that I've handled in the past where I just explain to people, I say cheaper a lot of times is more expensive.
Yeah.
And the reason, well, first is because you could pay someone to do something for a cheaper price, we'll say, or in this case, you're representing yourself, so you're not paying anything. But then the cost on that with all the different things that come about with real estate, there are so many things that if you're fairly green, you really just think, "Oh, I just got to draft something up and, bada bing, bada boom." Like you are setting yourself up for something that's going to cost you more than a commission would.
Hmm.
It's yeah, it's like you could get a pair of running shoes from Walmart for 30 bucks, but then in 6 months you're going to have to go and buy another pair and maybe before the end of the year you'll have to buy a third pair. Or you could go and spend like 150 bucks and get a pair of running shoes that's going to last like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, I totally understand the headaches that would come with that. If you're looking for a profound book on mental fortitude during extremely difficult times, then I highly recommend checking out the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. This book is jam-packed with real-life experiences from the 4 different internment camps, Nazi internment camps during World War II. So I highly recommend checking it out, and that's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. All right, let's get back to the show. So I'm just trying to think in the past, so prior to this legislation, with the difference between the client and the customer, was it essentially the same sort of thing? It was just titled differently then?
It was similar. So, with a self represented party now, they don't enter into an agreement with a realtor whatsoever. With customer, you would still enter into an agreement. So, there would still be paperwork that we would sign and we would lay out exactly what services we would be providing.
Okay.
Yeah. But you didn't have that level of care that a client would. So now that we have either a client or a self-represented party, what we can do to still serve you, or we can enter a limited client service agreement. So it's not customer, so you're still protected by, having your best interests in mind and confidentiality and all of those things that a client would benefit, but we can draw it up to be limited. So, if you want um, us to, again, it's kind of similar that we can post your property on MLS so that people can see it, but that's it. You don't want us to take pictures. You're providing your own pictures. You're providing your own staging, things like that. So we can do it that way as well. The self-represented party, we have to sign some things, such as we still have to provide them with the RICO information guide, and just to have them be aware of what they're of what they're doing by choosing to be a self-represented party. So we have to have a couple things signed, but as far as an agreement, a relationship between us and them, there isn't one.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, I appreciate you explaining that.
Yeah, no
It's
problem.
made me think of a question that I had for you a little later on, but I'm going to ask you it right now. I am wondering, when it comes to hiring you or partnering with you specifically, or your Coxworth and Associates, what why would someone partner with you? Where is the benefit there? What sort of things do you guys do that no one else can do, or maybe you do it better? Like, just asking where the value is there, because that's one thing that I think, just because there's so many real estate agent signs out there, it's almost like a commodity. So to decommoditize yourself, where's the added value with you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question because you're right. There are a ton of us, especially, in our small little town. You see signs popping up everywhere. So, really great question. And it really comes down to there's three aspects to my real estate business. We've got the overarching Sotheby's International Realty Canada, which is a phenomenal company. And it's quite unique in that we are one single brokerage all across Canada. Whereas, if, for example, if you see Remax, they have the, overarching Remax with a second name attached to it. That's a completely separate, independently owned brokerage. So essentially, they are still kind of competing against each other. Whereas Sotheby's International Canada, we are one single broker. So I can walk into Vancouver office, I can walk into Halifax office, and be able to work out of it. And I know that, they're doing things the exact same way that I would be doing them. So with that, we've got, a phenomenal marketing team. We've got admin services. We've got transaction representatives that are all looking at all of our transactions. So we've got a huge team to be like, hey, this doesn't look right, or hey, I think we need to brush up on this, things like that. So that is a huge advantage. So there's that, and then there's also the international aspect of Sotheby's as well. Is that throughout the years, Sotheby's has garnered relationships with businesses, websites, publications all over the world. And so, with that, every listing that we have is automatically syndicated to all of the publication relationships that Sotheby's has. So that's really cool because it just, it takes a long time to kind of build up those relationships. And the fact that we just have it included as part of our package is really, really neat. So there's that. So there's Sotheby's International Realty. And then if we want to go a little bit smaller, we've got my team. So my team is comprised of myself, my father, Brian Coxworth, and he's been in the business for probably over 20 years. So that right there is also a huge, huge advantage. He knows the business in and out. He's been doing it for, a number of years, and he's a really good mentor for me. So, having that as part of my kind of package is just instrumental, right? Like it's really different from doing my courses and doing, the education side and then actually putting it into practice. So having him to kind of help bridge that gap of, okay, I learned about this, but then when we're actually implementing it, it's kind of completely different. So having him to, be able to call up whenever I need to has been really beneficial. And we also have Vicky on our team too, and she is a licensed realtor assistant. So she does a lot of she does all of our photography, all of our video. She does all of our social media. So having that in house as part of our team is really beneficial because we don't have to rely on anybody. We don't have to rely on a photographer who might be working with several other realtors and can't get to a property you know, when we want to. So we can, that's really beneficial because we can, if you want to market your place or you want to list your place next week, we can do it. Boom, boom, boom. We've got our small team that can go in and we'll be out in a couple days and we can get it on the market as soon as possible. So I would say that's, another really good benefit of working with a small team that does all of what we need to do. And with that, we do offer a lot of the same services as other real estate agents. We do HD photography and video. We do Matterport, so that's like the 3D modeling of your home. It's really neat. If that there's iGuide, there's a couple different ones, but we use Matterport. We do drone work. So my dad is a licensed drone pilot, so he does all of our drone photography and video, which is really neat. Um, and then, as I said, all of our syndications through marketing and stuff with Sotheby's. And then, yeah, so that's great. And then coming down to me personally, I've only been in the business for just over 2 years. So sometimes that can be a little maybe not jarring for people, but sometimes it's like, oh, okay, well, you're still kind of like a newbie, right? So having the expertise of my team is really great. But I also think having that balance of fresh eyes and a younger kind of generation, I know how the younger people think. It's just different. So having that balance of generations, I think, is beneficial versus having just one or the other, right? We can kind of balance each other out. If he thinks one way and I think another way, then we can kind of meet in the middle or give each other different perspectives on different situations. Um,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, as we kind of talked a bit before, with my previous job experience working with mental health and addiction, I do believe that brings a really, really big piece of the way I do business because I'm very empathetic. I truly, truly take on other people's feelings, and I can kind of get into their mindset and truly understand where they're coming from start to finish. Also, as part of that job before, I was educating, right? A big piece of it was educating. And I think that's so important for my clients in real estate because the general public don't really know a whole lot about real estate, right? Which is kind of mind boggling because it's the biggest purchase you're going to make in your life and nobody really knows anything about it. So for me, educating and making sure that my clients are understanding exactly what is happening at every step of the way and really explaining to them what they're signing and what what the whole process is going to be like. I've had a lot of clients before being like, oh yeah, they just got, so and so just got me to sign it and away we go. And I'm like, okay, well, do you know what you're signing? They're like, no, not really. Like, okay, that's a problem. Let's go through this step by step. So paying attention to those kind of details, I think really is a good benefit of working with me.
That's amazing. And there's a couple key points that I want to point out because, uh, like, you just explain a plethora of ways that working with you and your team is very beneficial. And I think because not a lot of people might have caught this, but the fact that you said your father is the licensed drone pilot, to be able to take those photos from a someone who is in the real estate world and has been asked different questions and has that real estate mind of people will want to see this rather than this looks really nice, let's take a photo of that. And I think that goes a long way, and it's something that's it's so subtle that the average person might not even really think of it, but to have an understanding of the business and the people that like your clients and the people that you're that will be looking at this, to understand what they want to see, and then to be able to get those photos taken, and then like you said, having the person in house that you're working with all the time and they're specific to your needs, and you guys have an understanding of what your clients are looking for and what people in general, when they're looking at new places, what they're looking for, to be able to take those types of photos rather and videos rather than hiring an outside source that they might be doing, um, even if they're doing like five different realtors or real estate brokerages homes, or maybe they're doing a real estate with you, but they're doing a contractor taking photos for them, or like
Hmm.
now that they don't have like a niche and they don't deal with the customers on a daily basis. On top of that, the other thing that really stood out to me was the fact that you said your father's been in the business for like over 20 years, and you coming into the business for the past two, you still had, dinners with them, all these calls and all that. So you kind of grew up with it.
Hmm.
And now, like you said, you have that different perspective that I think is extremely beneficial, having the mental health and addictions background, being empathetic, and as well as having the real estate knowledge, being able to apply the theory in practice now. Like you said, like some of the things that you learned during the course is now you apply it and you're like, oh, okay, this is actually how it works. And it makes it more tangible for you to
Yeah.
understand. And then, like you said, having the working with your family members, like you have that core, the core fundamentals with added benefits of having those different age perspectives. So if you're working with an older client, then maybe you're going to your dad to ask, what should I be expecting here? Maybe bouncing some ideas off of him, and vice versa. He's probably coming to you and saying, I have these people that are younger. What's the best way? What are they looking for? And how can I present this in the best manner? So I think you guys have a lot of sides covered there, and like I said, that core group that you guys have in house, I think is extremely beneficial. So yeah, I really wanted to point that out because there's a plethora of things that you said,
Yeah.
and I don't think the average person would pick that out. But yeah. Anyways, hey guys, if you're into hiking at all, I highly recommend subscribing to my YouTube page, Steve Leslie Hikes. That's Steve Leslie Hikes on YouTube. I have a lot of content on there from some of the crazy hikes that I've been on, including Angel's Landing in Zion National Park. And it'd be really cool to connect on there. So please check me out. Thanks. Um, Okay, so that was a lot of great information, and that was just one of the changes. And one of the other legislation changes you had mentioned was the introduction of offer sharing. And I think this is actually a really interesting new thing that's come about, because in the past it was just um, you kind of had to, if you were buying a property, you kind of had to guess, you know, what's really going on, and where your poker face in that. So maybe you can elaborate on the introduction of offer sharing, and what that means as a buyer and a seller.
Yeah, definitely. So again, yeah, this was introduced on December 1st, 2023. And prior to that, we were legally not able to share anything in any offers, no matter, if a buyer wanted to or a seller wanted to, that was in our legislation. We couldn't share any details of any offer. The only thing that we could share, and which is still true today. So with this offer sharing, it really only comes down to when we get multiple offers. So if we're in a multiple offer competing situation, so it would not be, we would not be able to do it. Say we get an offer in today, the seller decides not to work with it, and then 2 weeks from now we get another offer in. We wouldn't be able to share any information of the offer that we got in today. So it's only in multiple offers. Say we get 3 or 4 offers that come in today, then we can choose to share the contents. Now, I like what you said about, the buyers wanting transparency, because, especially during COVID, it was the Wild West out there. It was, you were shooting at the moon. I went through it myself. I was buying my first home, and you had absolutely no idea what. And I mean, I'm a real estate agent. I even had a hard time, determining where we're at. And so on the buyer side, a lot of buyers really, they wanted that transparency. Unfortunately, this doesn't necessarily cover that completely, because it is completely up to the seller's discretion of what they want to share, if they want to share, and they can change their mind at any given moment too. So if, they put their house up for sale at the beginning, they say, we're not going to share any content of the offer. They get a bunch of offers in, and then all of a sudden they're like, you know what? I think I do want to share now. Or they have one round, send all the offers back. They didn't share anything. They get the second round in, and they're like, okay, now I want to share. So I think it's going to be a little bit frustrating for buyers, even though in essence, more transparency seems like a good thing. They put it all in the seller's hands. So it really is only, or for the most part, going to benefit the seller, unfortunately. So as a buyer, there are a couple things that you can do. So obviously, talk to your realtor about the pros and cons of offer sharing and what that might mean when you're placing an offer, and ways that you could maybe benefit, elevate your best interest. So there's been the creation of a clause that we are able to use in an offer that essentially nullifies the offer if the contents of it are shared. So, the clause kind of reads something like this, if any of the contents of this offer are shared, this offer becomes null and void, basically. So it kind of prevents a seller from sharing that. But there's pros and cons of having that clause in there, right? If you really, really want the house and the seller has all these other offers, they're like, we're just, okay, if you don't want to share, then that offer is gone. We're going to work with these other ones, right? So there's definitely pros and cons to that clause. And yeah, so for the buyers, it might be a little bit tricky, and it might be a little bit frustrating, especially because the seller client can change their mind at any time. So, as for the sellers, what's staying the same is that even prior to this legislation, the only thing that we could share was how many offers that we received. So if we got 4 offers in, we had to tell each of those 4 buyers that we got 4 offers in. So that's staying the same. We still have to disclose the number of offers. But now the seller can decide to share things such as the purchase price, any conditions that are in the offer. So if someone has a home inspection or a financing clause, we can share closing date, we can share deposit amount. The only thing that we cannot share is any personal information of the buyers, so names, things like that. And so for the sellers, there's pros and cons to sharing stuff too, right? And that's just going to be a conversation that is going to have to happen between the realtor and their client. And it could be circumstantial too. There may be instances where sharing a certain aspect of the offer is going to be beneficial, and there may not be. So it's going to be a case by case kind of scenario, and the seller really has complete control. They can, decide when, if, what, all of that.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
It definitely adds a different dynamic. And
Mhm.
wouldn't have even thought about what you said about the buyer could also put in their offer as one of the conditions, is saying, if you choose to share this, then this offer is null and void. So especially in like today where we're at, like I can see how that can, it's basically just a poker match. Like
Yeah.
that's really what it comes down to. So um, fascinating. I do like I like the ability to be transparent. So,
Mhm.
like you said, it could be totally the same. Like you might, as a buyer, you might not have any idea on other offers other than, oh, we got four offers. Um, so interesting. It's an
Mhm.
interesting added component.
Yeah, definitely.
And okay, the next one that was mentioned was a designated representative. Now, is this similar to the uh, introduction to the self-represented party, or I guess what exactly does that mean?
Yep. So this is separate from the self-represented party. So this is when you're entering into a client relationship with a realtor slash brokerage. So again, prior to December 1st, every single agreement that we had was a brokerage representation. So when you're signing all of the documents, you are entering into a relationship with that brokerage. Um, and then you had an agent that you were having as your point of contact, right? So I'm your agent, but really the representation agreement is with my brokerage. So that means that every other agent of my brokerage is also representing you as a client. So for a company like Sotheby's, where we're completely all across Canada, having every single agent working for you can, one, be a benefit, but then also there's this thing called multiple representation, which I don't know if you've heard before, but it happens if I've got, say, a client and another agent or myself brings another client to that same transaction. So, for example, if I have a listing, I've got a seller client, also got a buyer client that we've been looking for properties, and they decide that they really like my seller's property and want to submit an offer, then we would be in multiple representation. And with the brokerage representation, any agent of my brokerage, if they submitted an offer, would also be multiple representation. So they kind of took a look at this and wanted to make some changes. So they've introduced designated representation, which means now when you enter agreement, you're still, overarching entering it with that brokerage, but then you have a designated agent, so a designated representative that's going to be overseeing your transaction. So if I am the designated representation for one single client, another agent of my brokerage isn't representing that client. It's only me. So it's was introduced to kind of help out multiple representation that make it less likely that it would occur. Um, so with that, there, pros and cons to that too, right? we have to now be extra careful. I don't go to the office very often, but say I was in the office and I was speaking to a client, I'd have to be a little bit careful of what I said, maybe around other agents, that I don't, slip up and say something that could maybe give their client, their buyer client, an advantage. Whereas before, it was multiple representation, so your interests were protected by everyone anyways. But now it's a little bit different in that sense.
One of the things that you touched on with the designated representative, I'm wondering how that affects the what was mentioned a couple minutes ago, how that affects working with Sotheby's. You had mentioned that the uh, if you're a client of Sotheby's, all the agents are like across the country are working for you. But then with this designated representative, it kind of almost contradicts that. So I'm just wondering if you could clarify how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, but my wording was probably not the best. So not that every agent is working for you. Any agent could work for you because essentially they're a client of the brokerage, right? Not of each specific agent.
Okay.
Client chooses to work with a specific agent, and that just essentially is, you're the point of contact for that client, right? Um, just because Sotheby's is across Canada doesn't necessarily that mean that a agent in Saskatchewan is going to be reading up on you know a client that I have in Ontario. Right, all of that information is still protected. The only people that would still have access to that information would be, our admin team, our transaction coordinator, people like that would still be working for that client. So none of that changes. It's just the designated representative comes into play to, again, just try to avoid the multiple representation as much as possible. Because when multiple representation occurs, the services that the client receives become limited, because it's conflicting when, I've got a buyer and I've got a seller, I'm working in their best interest. I can't work in the best interests of both of them because they're competing against each other, right? So I can't, if I've got a seller and we have their home listed for, X amount, but they've told me in confidence, oh, I'm willing to accept this amount. I can't then go to the buyer and say, hey, the seller would accept this amount, and then vice versa. I can't say, so I can't advise either of them anymore on price. Whereas, if I was a designated representative for one of them, and say another agent from my office is a designated representative for one of them, then then I'm able to fully work in the best interest of my client. They're fully able to work in the best interest of their client. Before the designated representative, because we're both working for Sotheby's, we wouldn't be able to do that, right? Does that make a little bit more sense? It is a little bit
Yeah.
confusing, especially when you start getting into multiple role representation. That's a whole other topic that we can talk about. It is quite confusing.
It's actually kind of funny because when I've bought properties, I've actually my the mentor that I had, that was one of the things that he recommended me do, just because of the you're essentially causing conflict, and
Hmm.
the premise of it was because as a multiple representative, if the let's say the commission that you would get as a buying agent and a selling agent is, say, 3% each. Well, now all of a sudden, if one agent is representing the buyer and the seller, they get a 6% commission. And so by actually going and doing that, um, you really have to know what you're doing and whatnot. But the reason why someone would do that, at least in my perspective, was as a buyer to try to eliminate those other offers by saying, hey, you could essentially double your commission by just showing mine, which is that's 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 going against some rules there. So I can definitely see the reason they would eliminate that, but I thought I'd share that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, like every other profession, right? There's some shady things that happen. And so this new legislation that is implemented is just another layer of trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that, we're held more accountable for some of those things. But yeah, you're right. Like there are reasons why sellers or buyers might choose to go that route, and it can still happen. Multiple representation can still happen, but every single person in the transaction needs to agree to it, and we need to get it in writing. So they need to fully understand what it means, and they need to fully agree to have it done. So yeah, for a seller, it might mean that, you know, if we have an agreement prior to that, maybe we do a reduction on commission if I do bring the buyer or something like that might benefit them. That's allowed as well. But again, it's a lot of it's case by case, and you just have to be completely transparent with, I mean, I have to be completely transparent with my clients, right? And just make sure that they fully understand what the implications are for them.
More from the Promo Minds podcast coming up shortly. Promo Minds. Promote your brand, transform your business. All right. We got the last bit of legislation that had changed there, or I guess maybe the most dominant ones. Um, okay, so the mandatory RICO information guide. So I guess does that mean that that's something that you have to provide your clients, and maybe in the past didn't have to?
Yeah, yeah. So before our old legislation, we just had basically our listing or buyer representation documents that we were obligated to go over, clause by clause, making sure that they understand fully what they're signing. Um, Now, before we're able to enter into any agreement with a client, we need to provide them with this RICO, which RICO is our kind of governing body. All of our legislation, it is administered by them. It stands for Real Estate Council of Ontario. So they've created this guide to essentially ensure that consumers can make an informed decision based on, all of the information in there, and whether they want to be represented by a realtor or become a self-represented party. So, if you're speaking, the next time you speak to a real estate agent, they're probably going to send you this right after that conversation, just because we have to try to give it to consumers at the earliest opportunity possible. Make sure that they have a read through it, and then we're supposed to go through it with them as well, just to ensure their understanding. Because I'm sure you've had instances where you send somebody something, they say they read it, and they really have not done it. So we have to try our best to ensure that they do understand everything in it. So what I do is I send it to them, I allow them to read it through, and then I jump on a call and we just kind of go through it together, just so I know that they know what all of the information is. So yeah, what's in the guide is basically all that they need to know about the real estate transaction. So it lists some benefits of working with a real estate agent, depending if you're a buyer or a seller. It lists out the duties that you are owed as a client. So talking about, covering your best interests, the disclosures, confidentiality, all of that stuff. And then it also, as part of it, just to kind of bring more clarity and more understanding, it lists duties that you owe as a client. So sometimes that is missed when people are going through agreements is, realtors have obligations to you, But then you also have some obligations as a client too, right? Of sharing relevant information, responding to us, understanding your terms, paying the agreed fees, things like that. So it just lists all of that really clearly and carefully. Then it goes through self-represented parties. So it lists all of the risks about self-represented parties. So I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. You're handling every aspect of it, and that could also have some legal implications if it's not done properly. So it goes through all of that. It cautions on multiple representations, so it explains what it is, when it could occur, and knowing, all of the rules and implications around that before you agree to it. And then what is new as well, which I really like, is there's kind of like an accountability section. So it's a section that you as a consumer, it tells you how you can make a complaint to Rico or to the realtor's brokerage. So I think they were finding in the past that a lot of consumers didn't really know that, we have this body, this governing body that we have to, have to adhere to. And so when something went wrong with either the transaction or with the agent, they didn't know that they were able to lodge a complaint against them. So this just kind of outlines how you're able to do that. So I think that portion is beneficial to consumers, just so that they know, like, hey, we are held accountable. We have to be held accountable, and you can help, with that. So that's pretty much all that is in that guide. And then as realtors, we will typically ask you to either sign something, just acknowledging that you've received it and you understand the information.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Megan, I have a lot of questions that I want to ask you, but we are getting to the end here. So I want to ask you something. One of
Yep.
the things that I typically ask all my guests is for some recommendations, either books, podcasts, YouTube channels. Doesn't have to be genre specific, but if you have any recommendations, please share.
Yeah, sure. So I've got two books that I usually like to recommend, because they're just, yeah, they're really great books. And I was thinking about them today, actually. And I was like, you know what? I really need to reread them again because they're just that good. So one is kind of geared more towards my business. It's called The Go-Giver, by Bob Berg and John David Mann. And it essentially talks about, it's kind of the opposite of like the go-getter, right? Like everyone's always in that mentality of the go-getter, of like, you got to hustle, you got to, do all these things, work, 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 work. And this kind of just takes a different approach of that, is where it's kind of, be the go-giver. So talks about kind of like the 5 laws of success of, your value, showcasing your value, and your worth is going to, be determined by how much value you give. Compensation, so your income is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. It talks about influence, like your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests above yours. Authenticity. So, you have the most, like you yourself is your biggest asset, basically, right? So the more
Mhm.
authentic that you can be, the more you're going to get in return. So it just kind of touches more on that of like, if you're giving, things will kind of come to you. So I always tell people, if you want to kind of change your mindset in your business model, that's a good place to start. Have you heard of that one?
Oh yeah, I've read that one, and
Yeah.
they have a follow up one too.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't remember what it's called now, but I have that book. I don't have the original book
Oh,
that
okay.
you
Yeah.
described, but
Yeah.
I have the updated one.
Yeah. No, it's a good one.
It's amazing, and it speaks what you just said, for the authenticity and showcasing your value. It's it reminds me of there's another author speaker that I heard in 2015 called Andy Andrews, and he delivered this incredible speech that like really shaped my mindset. And one of the things that he brought up was competing where others can't or won't. And talking about the go giver there, when you're talking about showcasing your personal value, your authenticity. Going back to near the start of our conversation, you had mentioned you come from the mental health and addictions world, and the gifts that you got from that and how you've brought them into your role as a real estate agent, that's huge. And that's something that differentiates you from the rest of the pack. And
Yeah.
the more that you can express that and showcase that, um, no one else has that story. So I
Mhm.
think that's amazing. That plus, reading a book like that, you're going to come up with all these ideas and just have it shape your mind in that direction. So I think that's amazing. Anyways, what was the second book that you had?
So the second book, it's phenomenal, and again, like I feel like I need to read it again because it's been a while. And I think everyone should read this book, no matter where you're at in life, no matter what your mental state is. I think it's just beneficial to absolutely everyone. And I heard about it through my previous job of working in the mental health and addiction. It's called Lost Connections, by Johan Hari. Have you heard about him or that book?
No, no,
No. Yeah.
go on.
So yeah, it's really good. So Johan Hari, he's a award-winning journalist, and he has suffered from depression since he was a child. And at a young age, as young teens, he was put on medication, and he found that sometimes certain medication will work, but then it would stop working, and he'd have to doctors and stuff would do another concoction, and then it would work for a little bit longer, and then it would stop working. And so he was kind of just done with it, of like, what, this is clearly, it's not a long-term solution or a solution at all. It's just a band-aid, and I'm tired of this. I want to find out if there is something else out there that will actually be a solution to my depression, right? Because the doctors, North American doctors tend to lean more towards, it's a chemical brain imbalance. It's, it needs to be fixed with
Mhm.
medication. So he decided to see what other people were doing about depression. So he traveled all over the world to find out if different cultures and different places were dealing with depression in a different way. And so essentially, what the book goes through is kind of his journey and to all the places that he went. He tells little stories along the way, but the main point of it is that he found that there are 9 causes of depression, and a lot of it has to do with disconnection from certain things. So disconnection from meaningful work, disconnection from other people, disconnection from meaningful values, disconnection from childhood trauma, disconnection from status and respect, disconnection from from the natural world, disconnection from a hopeful or secure future. And then lastly, he did touch on, there are some cases where genes and brain changes can play a little bit of a effect. So, after discovering that those are the main causes, he's like, okay, well, how do we combat that? And essentially, it's the opposite. We start connecting to all of these things. And he kind of really lays out through stories of other people and stuff of how people are reconnecting to some of these things. And it's an incredible book. And as I said before, even if you're not depressed, or you've never been depressed, or um, aren't, even if you're not, even if you're completely fine, I still think it's a fantastic book to read, and read, every once in a while, because I've already kind of forgotten some of the things in it. But I think it's really beneficial to have all of those connections, and to have that, just a different perspective when it comes to those things.
Absolutely. That's a fascinating book. And I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah,
I
it's
know.
it's
Um,
really great.
so wow, that okay. So all the disconnections that you just laid out there, that is something that I know I have experienced several of those,
Mm,
and one of the things that I've been a big proponent of is mental health and sharing, what has helped me with, battle some of my um, episodes, we'll say.
mhm,
Um, and I think, especially now, following the pandemic, like that, everyone just went through a uh, something unfathomable. Like really, it just if you were at like a 1 or a 2 before, you could be at like a 9 or a 10 or above,
yeah,
right? It was the perfect recipe for that. So, and that's one thing that I have noticed in the last couple of years too is just the amount of pain and struggles that people are dealing with. They might put on a mask. They might be able to, you know, be quote unquote normal, whatever that is, um, when they're out and about. But look at Robin Williams. The guy made
mhm,
millions of people laugh. Looked like he was just the happiest dude, and then you find out that he committed suicide because he was battling with depression.
yeah,
So, um, to bring those conversations to the forefront and to understand that, like, again, like I said towards the start, the more personal something feels, the more universal it probably is. So the battle that you're facing, or like I'm saying this in a general sense,
mhm,
the battle that whoever's facing a battle, understand that you're not alone. You're not the only one facing that. It might feel that way, but to just like you said, connect with um well, you have the 9 connections there, but to connect with others to find out, what they're doing, how they're dealing with their depression or whatever they're going through.
yeah,
I interviewed a guy, Zach. He's got the Canadian podcast, and he talks a lot about this. And one of the things that he did was he started this men tell health, and focused on men's health or men's mental health. Um, and one of the things he did was he reached out to a bunch of different people, whether they were athletes, veterans, um, you know, whoever, and just asked them to share a brief, like a 30-second video or minute long video on Instagram about their struggles and how they got through it. And it just created this network of all these guys who, they one of the guys was George St. Pierre, I believe, shared something. Like you have all these guys that you think, well, they have it all together, and then all of a sudden you realize that they went through all these things. So
mm,
um, yeah,
yeah,
I'm definitely gonna
it-
get that book. So
yeah,
thank you for
yeah.
sharing that.
No problem.
Anyways, Megan, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all that information and breaking it down and kind of walking us through that. And then, like you said, just sharing those 2 books, I think, are huge. And so, lastly, I want to ask you, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so a number of ways. I don't prefer one method over the other. I think whatever you're comfortable with works best for you. So, phone number, you can call, text. I don't mind either, 705-543-9989, or email mcoxworth at sotheby'srealty.ca. And then I've got Facebook and Instagram. So I think both are just my name, Megan Coxworth. So you can reach out, whatever your preferred method is. I am pretty quick to respond. I don't like to leave people kind of hanging. So yeah, reach out by any means. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has about, anything at all. I'm happy to just have a conversation or to meet for coffee, whatever it is that you want to do.
Right on. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I will definitely put those in the show notes as well. And before I let you go, there's one thing that I have seen pop up here. You guys are doing something for the home show in Midland coming up, and I believe you've been asking the public if they are thinking about selling their properties um, to get a hold of you so that you can have it showcased in the home show. Is that maybe you can share a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So it's actually the Cottage Life Show that's in Toronto. So it's at the International Center. Um, so yeah, that's March 21st to the 24th. So anyone, we're reaching out to past clients or clients, current clients, anyone that has it's more geared towards waterfront. We do a lot of waterfront and recreational properties. So cottages and whatnot, both boat access and road access. So if you have a waterfront home or a cottage that you're thinking about selling, it's a really good time to introduce the property to the market. There's hundreds of thousands of buyers or potential buyers that come through the show. We've got a huge booth set up with Sotheby's with agents on staff. We have printouts of your property, brochures, and things that we hand out to potential clients. So it's a really great added marketing addition that you can have. That we offer all of our clients at no extra fees. So we typically say, if you're looking to list, you might as well try to list it in time for the Cottage Life Show because it's of no extra cost to you as a seller. So yeah, if you're, thinking about it or want to know more about the show, again, you can reach out and I can answer some questions.
Right on. That's like putting on steroids, the marketing for selling a house there. That's amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely, definitely, if you're thinking about selling, you should definitely consider that. Well, Megan, once again, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all the insights and knowledge and whatnot. And I'm sure we'll be chatting again and meeting up sometime soon. And enjoy your time in Costa Rica.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate the time that you've allowed me to discuss all of these things. I think it's important for people to know. So I'm happy that you've provided that platform for me, and I look forward to chatting with you again. Thanks so much.
So there you have it, another episode of the Promo Minds podcast interview series. And wow, that was a plethora of information and well dissected by Megan. Um, all the all the new legislation that came out at the start of December, um, that was really good to actually learn about and to unpack there. And kudos to Megan to sharing that all and having all that knowledge to dissect that for us. Um, and then on top of that, I think, like she said, the fact that with her background in mental health, bringing that to the forefront, working with her father, and having the in-house videographer and photographer, they have this really awesome setup. And like I said, we've chatted a few times at this meetup group, and if you're looking at selling, definitely reach out, especially if you have a cottage or a uh, Georgian bayfront or lakefront property. Definitely reach out, and I'm going to put that in the show notes as well. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Promo Minds podcast. I'm your host, Steve Leslie, and until next time, take care. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Promo Minds podcast. I'm Steve Leslie, and if you want help crafting your message or sharing your story, feel free to reach out. I'd love to help. Love coming up with ideas, and we can have a nice chat. So reach out to promominds@gmail.com and I'll respond. Take care.